Thank you, though.
Okay, so we are doing Lift in France. I'm Hayden.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Amir.
I'm Luke.
And so the company background, Lyft was founded in 2007 and it's based in San Francisco, California. It's founded by Logan Green and John Zimmer, those are the two co-founders. And the main service or product that they have is ride sharing. And so the company focuses primarily on college, university, and corporate communities. I got that from a source on Bloomberg from 2019, and it was formerly known as Zimride Incorporated, but they changed their name. So the country we wanted to bring it to is France. The population of the metropolitan areas of France is 62,814,233 people, and metropolitan France is defined as mainland France, not any of the principalities, just what we think of France today in mainland Europe. So the major areas in France are Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Lille, Toulouse, and Bordeaux. And then the largest age group in the population is men and women aged 25 to 54 years. And it comprises 37.48% of the population, which I got from the World Factbook in 2019. The geography of France, since we're mostly focusing on the metropolitan areas, France is about 4 times bigger than Georgia, but slightly less than the size of Texas. It has cool winters and mild summers, and this varies in the south of France near the Mediterranean just because it's near the Mediterranean and it's warmer there. There's also rolling hills, flat plains, and mountainous areas near the Alps.
Okay, so with social institutions, we have the family. The nuclear family is like the most important, and children stay home usually until they finish education. With the extended family, it's very common in rural France, provides financial and emotional support for the young ones, and then also like they have a lot of property that they occupy for generations. The dynamics of the family, so the parental roles, I felt like these were a little different from the United States because they say, oh, when it's playtime, it's playtime, and when it's not playtime, it's not playtime. So they're kind of more strict. They serve their children adult food, and this like screen time in France is really restrained compared to the United States. The dynamics of the family, so marriage, relationships are kind of like not so out there until like a long period of time. Many couples tend to live together before marriage, and religion is really important, and usually many people tend to marry those in the same religion. The females, so with France, nearly all women are engaged in paid labor, so that's good, and then also the males are like the primary income leaders. With education, primary education is from ages 6 to 11, and there's 5 different levels, and these are all lessons on literacy, numeracy, geography, history, all the general types of different subjects. With secondary education, there are 4 levels, ages 11 to 15, and during the year, students are tested every week, and at the end of the year, they have to pass with an average of 12 marks out of 20. So they have a different type of education than obviously the United States. At the end of the 4 years, all students must sit the brevet, the Diplôme National du Brevet. So everyone has to take that after the 4 years of middle school. And then besides middle school, you go to high school and the secondary education, and that's ages 15 to 18, so kind of like here too as well. There are only 3 levels though. Students start to specialize with the aim of sitting the baccalaureate, which is the qualification to enter a university or college. So the higher education, a baccalaureate or foreign equivalent, like I said before, you have to take that to get into a university. Some students take another 1 to 2 years of private studies. They then sit for an entrance exam into like a handful of prestigious schools known collectively, and they take it over engineering, business, politics, or administrative studies. In the literacy rates, age 15 and over can read and write, and the total population is 99%. So their political structure, their president is Francis Hollande, and the president appoints a prime minister who forms the government. So then there's a prime minister, he chooses the ministers, the president must approve of them. And then the Conseil de Ministres, the cabinet meets on a weekly basis, consists of 15 to 16 individuals. And then the ministers determine policy and put new legislations before Parliament in the form of bills. Within the framework of the existing law, they apply policy through decrees. And then there's the French Parliament, and that consists of the Assemblée Nationale, the lower and principal house. There's 577 deputies in that, and they also have the Senate, the upper chamber of Parliament. That's 348 senators. So the different political parties, the Socialist Party was established in 1905, the Popular Republican Movement established in 1924, the Radical Social Party established in 1936, the Conservatives in 1946, the Communists 1892, and the Union of the New Republic established in 1950. All these are different political parties that they have. A big one is the Socialist Party, and they stand for nationalism, welfare, planned economic investment, public housing, more civic liberty, and local welfare services. So the role of local government, so those are territorial collectivities. Those include the regions, the departments, the communes, and the overseas territories. So with the territorial collectivities, they have 21, or the regions have 21 metropolitan regions of mainland France, 5 overseas regions. The departments have 96 metropolitan France, and then 4 overseas. The communes, 9 members, and the overseas territories proclaim the Indian Ocean. The special. Oh yeah, the special taxes. Those are so they have a TV license tax, and they also have an inheritance tax, which I thought was pretty different from the United States. No matter if you have actual cable, you still have to. If you have a TV in general, you have to pay tax. And then inheritance tax, siblings of the deceased are taxed at 35% for amount up to €24,000 and 45% for more. So it's kind of crazy that you're taxed from just inheritance from your elders. So the stability of the government. So this is showing from 1996 to 2017 how it declined from far back, just because the government got crazy there and more violent, and things weren't as safe, so it declined from 1996. And then the organization of the judiciary system, so they have the judicial branch, first degree of jurisdiction, public prosecution, court of cassation, the administrative branch. In the Code Common Socialist or Islamic country, so it's a code civil or civil code, and it was established in 1804. It laid down the rights and obligations of citizens and the laws of property, contract, inheritance, etc. Participation in patents. So the patents, they're granted for 20 years. And to get a patent, you have to be new, involved, and inventive. For trademarks, to get a trademark, you have to be capable of graphical representation, distinctive, non-deceptive, lawful, and available.
Okay, continuing on with social organizations. So today in France, women make up about 46% of the workforce. However, they tend to be more concentrated in low-paying jobs, and they're more likely to be unemployed than men are. A privileged elite composed mainly of leading politicians, senior civil servants, business leaders, and wealthy families still retains a strong grasp on the levels of power. Among white-collar workers, 2 different groups have emerged. There's the successful, upwardly mobile senior executives and professionals with expanding sending power and stable jobs, and then a growing mass of people in clerical, retail, and food service jobs. The blue-collar workers remain economically and socially segregated. Only a small portion of university students come from blue-collar workers or blue-collar households. The number of blue-collar workers has steadily declined in recent years as the economy has shifted from jobs and industry to the service sector. And then continuing on, there are many social clubs and organizations in France. Some include the British and Commonwealth Women's Association, which to be a member you have to be married or be a woman and like a married British or Commonwealth nationals. Then there's the WICE, which is an art and culture and language club. Then the Irish in France, which is basically just people from Ireland that live in France. Then Republicans Abroad, which is like Republicans from the US that are living in France. And then the demographics, 85% are white or European, 10% come from North Africa, and then 3.5 are black and 1.5 are Asian.
So the French religion, most of the country is Roman Catholic, about 65% of it, and then about 25 is atheist, 5% is Muslim, and all other religions are 2% or less. And the country used to be a lot more Catholic. It used to be about 85 or 90%, but they had something called the crisis of the faith back in the 90s, which just issues with the church and the church not being as involved with the community. People started to lose their faith, and that's where the spike in atheists in France came. Now it's the Catholic Church is a little more involved in France. They get a lot more airtime, and they're pretty involved in political and social and ethical debates. So anytime politics or some big news is going on, they usually get a say in it. And there's also, in the past years, there's been a spike in younger involvement in the church, so they're seeing a lot more people coming back to it. So some of the visual arts, France's rich in tradition. They believe that a lot of this comes from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. They had a lot of painters and sculptors in the Renaissance and Middle Ages. Anything from painting, sculptures, architecture, and photography tends to get a pretty amount of support in France, whether it's from the government or the people, because it's something they value. And on the streets all the time, you'll see people painting or doing some form of art on the streets that you can see. Music, I was actually kind of surprised to find out that US pop is actually the most listened to type of music there, followed by French pop. And then they're also big fans of EDM. And then performing arts, every summer they have a thing called the Festival of Performing Arts, and it's all over France, mainly in the cities, but people from all over the world come to see it. They have certain festivals that are known all over the world, a bunch of smaller ones in different cities. One thing I did notice was that when I was doing research on it, they offered a lot of study abroad classes for performing arts, so it's something they clearly value. They're offering classes for people to come from other countries to learn about it there. And they have a lot of places to watch shows and stuff, and people come from all over the world to some of these venues to see them, so they offer subtitles in a lot of different language so you can read along, because all the plays are in French. And then some relevant symbols, the French tricolor, which is the blue, white, and red. It stands for liberty, equality, and fraternity. They hold that to a high value. And the Gallic rooster, it was a rooster that they used to put on the flag during the Revolution, and it was like a symbol of the people. And they, the government kind of inherited it as their symbol, and it replaced the fleur-de-lis. And you can actually find it in things like, that's their national soccer team symbol, and it's incorporated in that. Diet and nutrition, the French eat a lot smaller portions than we do here in the US. It's more rich food, and they spend a lot of time eating, so when they sit down to eat, it's not really, let me go through a drive-through. They actually want to sit down and either have a conversation with somebody or relax. They take longer to eat. And they value quality of food there versus quantity, where in the US, I think a lot of people would rather eat more than better. And they kind of have a processed food shun, where if they could eat healthy food, they'll take that over processed food, and it's kind of looked down upon there. Typical breakfast in France is just kind of like bread, cereal, yogurt, fruit, granola, and some coffee. And then lunch is more of a small portion of meat and vegetables and some sort of starch. And they'll usually end it with cheese and coffee. When it comes to protein, they prefer fish or chicken as opposed to red meats. Housing, about 50% of the population owns it versus rents. More people rent in the city than they do in the country. And living arrangements are much smaller, so the apartments are smaller than they typically are here in the US. And most people do live in a single family unit. So clothing in France, Paris is known as the fashion capital of the world, so adults typically dress business casual, even when they're just hanging out with friends. They dress a little nicer. Appearance is pretty important to them. Things like sweatpants, pajamas, and oversized shirts that we might sometimes wear here in the US. You'd kind of get some funny looks if you walked around the street wearing those, unless athletic wear and stuff's appropriate, obviously, if you're working out or doing whatever. And they're big on brand names, so the brand names you wear, they do pay attention to. Recreation and sports, soccer and cycling are the biggest sports there. They have no physical education, so any sports that you play, you actually have to sign up for a club team or club sport in some way. And this isn't really like sport or anything, but one thing, since they don't have physical education and unless you want to play, you have to pay. A lot of them just like to go to cafes and reading, talking, eating, and going to performance shows with one another. Social Security, they have 4 categories for this. They have the old age and retirement category, illness, family, and accidents at work. And their Social Security is very generous. Most people would describe 32% of their GDP is that's more than any other country, but the problem with it is they're starting to see a deficit. People are starting to live longer, so they're having to keep spending money on them, and they're running out of money every year. They're spending more money than they have saved for Social Security. And healthcare, a lot of people categorize it as one of the best overall healthcare in the world when it comes to things like cost and treatment and your waiting times and the organization. 80% of all healthcare is covered by the government. There's some things that aren't covered, but even those are much more affordable. And the entire, I don't know why that cut off. The entire French population is covered if you live in France, but just like with Social Security, people are living longer and they're starting to see issues with too much money being spent.
All right, so some key tips when conducting business in France. You want to introduce yourself with your first and last name. And when you're addressing someone from France, you want to use monsieur for men and madame for women. You want to do a loose handshake and greet by kissing on the cheeks. Wear proper business attire just like you would in the US. At a meal, you want to keep your hands on the table because that shows interest. Business meetings should be scheduled 2 weeks in advance and expect many questions and interruptions when presenting your product. And sales usually not done right away. They usually will not build a relationship and get to know you before they want to do so. And then moving on to language, they only have one official language, and that is French. This is used in all business settings, so you want to keep that in mind. Then they have some regional languages like Celtic French, Germanic, Italo-Dalmatian, or Gallo-Romance. There are 28 different dialects in France, and some of the main ones are Standard French, Canadian French, African French, and Belgian French. And then some of the negotiation styles. They're very nationalistic, as Amir was kind of pointing to earlier, and they're very hard-headed like Americans. This is something to keep in mind when dealing with them. So don't be surprised if they brag about their country or whatever at meetings. French people know hardly nothing about other cultures because it's not taught in schools, or it is, but it's very minimal. You're not seen as equal. You're either better or worse than them. They will do business with you if you have a good product or if you buy it, but their initial posture will be somewhat condescending. They like to determine the other sides and aim aims and demands at the beginning of the meeting, and they rarely make important decisions on the first meeting or inside the meeting. They usually like to make their decisions outside. And then the objectives are long term, so they're usually not gonna look for a product that's just short term. Short term, they want to make sure that it'll benefit them in the future.
And that is all we have.
Zach?